me there.
Yeah.
I find that it's a birth, and I find that any trauma story is like a birth, but the fresher the trauma, the harder the birth. And so what I find is a lot of my own trauma got triggered when you were speaking. And so I was upset when Sari said, "Hey guys, I have to
You
go.
gotta go.
I'm at the hour mark." And I was like, whoa, we're witnessing this woman's story. And I felt like I was witnessing my own story and kind of reliving some of those same emotions over again of like disbelief and like betrayal. And it's weird betrayal because it's plant medicine people betrayal. So it's kind of like got this big happy like hippie sticker stuck on top of like someone that they've just like knocked over and like left to die on the side of the road. And you're like, this is so, it feels so disconnecting, or counter indicated, or just you know,
That's a great.
you'd almost prefer people tell you up front like I hate you, or I'm gonna lie about you or talk about you, and then you'd be like, okay man, that's cool, like, you know, lie about me or talk about me or trash me, but at least I know like you're not gonna pretend to be my friend and not pretend to be like a cool hippie, you know, or whatever. So I thought
Can
it
I,
was I
can
thought
I
it
say,
was interesting today. I reached out to my mentor and I asked her if she would write this book with me because she's a political leader in the psychedelic field, a woman also. And I asked her today and she said, not willing. She was very firm in her response. I don't want anything to do with that biz in the public. Things are so crazy and cruel in the decrim legal argument. Same people, assholes. One who has an ethics complaint against him and got fired and lies, and everyone ignores he harmed trauma patients. Reminds me of Trump. Psychedelics are no different. And so here's my mentor saying, it's not even worth it for me to tell my story of trauma because this is such an unsafe space. So as we are talking about the legal logistics of psychedelics and creating these safe spaces and so forth, are we navigating these waters in safe ways? So I actually left your interview with kind of a shitty feeling in my own stomach or my own mouth because I was like, I had a bad taste in my mouth because I was like, damn, I felt like we owed you an apology. And
well, it was pretty surprising that Sari did that, especially because on the front we didn't at the beginning of the our meeting, no time frame was given. The time frame she had referenced was that it was very open ended. It would probably be a couple of hours. That's what I was told. And so for her, initially she put it in the chat that's like, I gotta go. And I saw that, and I don't know if you saw, I was sort of like distracted by like, I need to keep flowing, and here's this weird thing. And then she interjected and said what she said, and it was just like, yeah, I Sari's a really sweet person, but there are definitely places where I really differ from her. So I feel you with it
right,
would
but
have
at
been
the
nice for
same
her to just duck out, maybe send you a private message saying I gotta go, and just like I wouldn't have been upset if she just disappeared. I wouldn't have like whatever. Anyway,
So, but because I'm not having that conversation with her and it happened so abruptly, I was left feeling kind of re-triggered because for me, we don't respect the whiny woman. We don't respect the woman who needs to sit and tell her story in our culture and in our society. And that's why we're doing this work. But, you know, we carry our own misogyny towards one another and towards women. And, you know, so I'm not trying to trash anybody, but at the same time, in that moment, if I'm just speaking to my experience, I felt rushed, I felt traumatized, I felt like, yeah, this is, you know, kind of a long-winded way of telling what is probably a very traumatic story. And yet, do we allow things to be awkward or uncomfortable or not be like perfect for a podcast because it's not fitting into this tight little
well,
like
you could edit it later, right?
right.
Like,
Well,
or
you were telling it kind of like a story. It'd be very hard, I think, to get in
yeah,
there with like a commercial break. But
yeah.
anyway, so because I wasn't having that conversation with her, I was in just like shock myself. And so I felt like very quickly like, oh, we're just moving to end this. But I felt like I had participated in re-traumatizing you. I had participated in re-traumatizing myself. And because it ended so abruptly, I ended up feeling like, damn, I don't even know this woman. And I feel like I need to apologize to her. And I also feel shitty kind of myself. Like, look at how we're treating a woman who's talking about her trauma story. Like, if you're talking about your rape story, we're not like, oh, you know what? We're going to have to like, Yeah, we're
Wrap
gonna
it
have to come
up.
back to that. We're gonna have to stop you right when Jimmy's ripping off the clothes, or sorry, he had
Yeah.
already like broken your hymen at that point, but you know. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's how I felt. But where you were at in the story was you had a friend or someone that you thought was an ally that was on the team, and you had kind of come back to the group and been like, whoa, ho, ho, guys, like you didn't really actually get me off the board with any kind of legitimacy. And then when you kind of called them out on that or brought that to their attention, they were like quick to be like, whoever the bullies were, whoever the, you know, the people are who are navigating our demise, right, our political demise, they're savvy, they're quick, and they're like, oh, did I forget to check that box? Like, thanks for reminding me, bitch. I can check that box. So the dudes fucking checked that box, and you thought some people were like on your side. And then what I felt from you and your story was a lot of betrayal of like, here you are having private conversations of like, it's embarrassing to go and say, hey, by the way, these plant medicine people that I thought were my friends or thought were cool aren't actually cool, and they're out to get me, and they're out to get rid of all my work and get rid of who I am, and just dismiss me, and then have someone say, "Oh man, that sucks. I'll stand up against that. That's a bunch of bullshit." You know, I'm not a racist. I'm going to go for those KKK members, right? Someone tells you, "I've got your back, buddy," right? And then shows you, like, man, these two-faced Pacific Northwest motherfuckers, they'll stab you in the back every single time. Like, they will tell you to your face they are your friend, and they are not your friend, my friend. So I get it because I've dealt with this Pacific Northwest culture where people aren't transparent, but every time it hurts you in your gut because you're like, dude, you just played me real bad, real wrong.
And the irony with the fact that it is mushrooms, like all these people have taken mushrooms and supposedly have are positive, and like you're able to go to some, at least if they're taking appropriate doses and really flowing with it, you're connecting with the all, and yet you come back and the big ego, power play nonsense goes on, and yeah, the misogyny and
But I
yeah.
think sometimes we're running with our impression and our lens, and so our lens says, you lucky son of a bitch, you got to touch God. Do you know what I mean? You got to touch Hashem, you got to touch eternal source. This is things that the oracle at Delphi, only the most holy got to touch historically in all these cultures. I don't care what people say, like it was the holy people that got to touch these medicines and got to be that conduit with God, with consciousness, right, with alien consciousness. And so, and basically what's the source of all of our religions, you know? And so for those of us who like are like, man, after I touched source itself, that source was so loving, so benevolent, so kind, so stewardshipy. I cannot imagine touching that and then turning around and feeling motivated, inspired, justified in treating another human being like shit. So that's where I think the disconnect is, because you're like, whoa, how can you possibly climb to this mountain, sit with this, you know, wise teacher, and then you're motivated to come down off that mountain and treat women or treat other people like crap.
And yet it
So
does segue into, or at least I'll make the comment, the so-called insurrection shaman, the guy with the fancy headdress, represents a segment that I have learned about, which are sort of your white supremacist, scary people who, some of them actually do psychedelics. And whether it's LSD or mushrooms, I don't know. And yet, to me, up until I learned that those people do that and they still are like white supremacist, assholes, I thought, because when I connect with source, I feel like I experience truth. And so, since white supremacy is bullshit, you would think that when they experience that, they would see that. And apparently that's not maybe how it works, that it can just sort of amplify where you are because, white supremacy people exist. That's part of consciousness. And you can get amped up on that if that's your intention, if that's your setting and your plan. So I suppose we could translate, that's kind of obnoxious of me to, because the folks that did me wrong are not racist white supremacist people. I mean, they're misogynist and they don't realize it because, women being less than is just so deeply, for 5,000 or 10,000 or however many years has been just the understood part that it's hard for them to see that they're doing that. But doing the mushrooms seems to not let them be humbled and see the truth of equality. And
So
yeah.
what if I said to you, like, whoa, this planet that you're on, that you're inhabiting as a conscious species, that your species are about to have this medicine go viral, right? And
Mhm.
amplify whatever people are, whatever their mindset is. And yet you just described to me a civilization that is so ingrained with hatred towards women that it doesn't even understand or see its hatred towards women, that it's so much a part of the cultural fabric. So how can women come up in this divine time of opportunities for leadership? Where are the role models for women to treat other women kindly and support women? Do we need to create an island of just women? Do you know what I mean? A place where there isn't that competition. I feel like as soon as there's a man there, it creates a competition where his life has more meaning or has more value, and that women often play off that male energy. How do we allow a place for women to grow up where they don't even know about misogyny? I would like there to be girls growing up in this world who never have to experience misogyny. But like you, I find it so ingrained into the culture. One of the chapters in my book is the nice guys, right? The nice guys were the guys that, like, everyone said, hey, he's a nice guy. He wouldn't do that to you. Like, assholes would do that to you, but not him. He's a nice guy, right? So in the plant medicine community, there's lots of these nice guys, right? And we're lucky to have them, and we have no right to complain because it's not like they're calling women bitches or whores or sluts. You know what I mean? So they're obviously feminists. So,
Well, and too, if they're truly feminists, then they would create and I guess that is the trick, is to get them to see, you know, equal. Yeah. I don't have a good answer for that. I hear what you're saying. And somewhere in an answer I might craft would be to have them be able to realize, I guess as a woman, as a white woman, I do that. Like if anything comes up that's a racial piece, I step back. My white privilege, I step right on back. I don't at all think it's for me to say anything about, a person of color's issue. And so for men to understand, as soon as something with gender comes up, you step the fuck back and shut the hell up and let the women speak. Maybe you don't understand. Maybe you disagree. You shut the hell up. You do not then say, well, I disagree because whatever. It's like, we're talking about gender inequality. You are a man. You should know to shut the hell up, like I do as a white woman. I shut the hell up. I would never. I'm not perfect. I'm sure you can find an example, but my intention would be to absolutely never speak for a person of color or explain to them. So the whole mansplaining thing. White people splaining to others. No, I just yeah.
So I'm feeling frustrated and tired and beat down and unappreciated and stabbed in the back and unsupported and unseen and invisible. And I don't want to be invisible. I want to be in a world that allows me to lead in the psychedelic revolution, but sees my potential and sees my leadership and doesn't seek to squash me or to tell me. I've had so many men in this movement literally say, can you hand this over to a man? I have another man that can lead. Here's another man. I mean, we're talking Decrim Nature, Decrim Nature National, like insanity that I think if I could really write about in my book and really find a way to show how the insanity, I think you have to have a very smart way of getting people to understand and see the misogyny, because I think it's like we've been so ingrained into it. Like when you say to someone, well, Steve wouldn't get a letter saying, hey, Steve, give that up to Sally because Sally can handle that better than you, Steve. Like Steve would be pretty upset about getting that letter.
And if Steve complained about that, people would listen. Steve wouldn't be a bitch or a whiner or whatever,
Right.
which is what, yeah, women,
Right.
yeah, powerful women are bitches and powerful men are leaders.
or the standards that we allow women to get move ahead. We tell ourselves, oh, look, women are getting ahead, look, they're in positions of power. My argument would be, but they're women that aren't necessarily uplifting other women. There are women that have often gotten there by pushing down other women. There are women that have had to model themselves after power structures that are built on patriarchy, which is often about, just being a face at the table, but basically not being a question asker, and certainly not being someone that has a conflict with people, And so I think women can sure make it to the top, if they keep their mouth shut or if they model power as it's traditionally been held by men. But not if you lead as a feminist, I would say. As a male or female feminist, I think that this world, just like it's such a proponent of capitalism, the misogyny is deep in there with the capitalism and the patriarchy and the racism, classism. So I feel like people don't realize it, but they're really supporting all of that, by allowing women to be treated this way. And so it's just really hard to see, because I feel like there's this community that wants to be conscious, the plant medicine community, and then at the same time look at how we treat our women. And then if you want to bring ageism into it, like let's say you had been 22 and your breasts were really perky and you were really cute, and you could be one of two things. You can be the earth mother that's here for everyone's wounds, that has the big breasts, that can nurse people and have their head on her shoulder and pat them, and on her breast and pat them, and she's like the mother for us all, the earth mother, which is an exhausting role, and that sounds like cancer, like you're going to get cancer from being such a giver your whole life. And then there's the Kama Sutra goddess role, right? You can do the workshop for your yoni and talk about the divine feminine, and speak at the Kama Sutra festival, as long as you're hip and young and beautiful, right? But after that, you don't really have much. You can be the villainess, right? You can be Amber Heard, right?
Yeah, I certainly experienced that. It's I don't know where the shift is, somewhere maybe in your 40s. I guess it depends on your appearance, where women do become invisible in this culture. People don't look at you. People don't, and too, because as a younger woman, I was attractive. And so as a younger woman, heads turn, like you that edgy thing, because you can't go anywhere because people notice you. And then it's weird because at some point that changes, and then people stop noticing you. And then the emotions and the self-esteem of like, oh, now I have no value, which too, ultimately it's important,
right? But it doesn't happen to Steve. It doesn't happen to Steve.
Oh no, yeah, because men don't. Yeah.
No one cares that Steve's ball sack is hitting the floor. So,
yeah. Oh, I did want to insert a quick definition of feminism. I know when you said, male or female, which I agree with. My understanding of, or my definition of feminism would be, equality. Men and women are equal, and so too, women can be feminists and men can be feminists, because there are, I think, some people, maybe even some listeners, that would say men are feminists. That's not a thing. So maybe speak a moment about your definition.
I was raised in a household where men were feminists. I was raised in a household where men talked about being feminists. I was raised in a household where we were taught that girls could be feminists, boys could be feminists. The whole world should be feminist, because we should all care about equal rights, with an understanding that equal rights are a greater issue for women. There's a lot of areas, like in the men's movement. My dad got his doctorate in men's ministries, which is a very specific kind of area of men's spiritual work. But lots of Robert Bly, the poet that's really big in the man's movement, Robert Bly. So I grew up with like the man's movement, but it's very much men learning how to not be toxic men, how to repair their relationships with their fathers, how to understand that men have been told they can only be like angry. There's not really like a lot of emotions that they're allowed to express. Certainly, if you look at the way that men are allowed to dress, that's why I want the 70s to come back in terms of fashion, because I think it allowed men to wear more color and express themselves. And I feel like men are oftentimes living a very muted life. If you look at their clothing and their ability to accessorize, I mean, it's quite boring and constrained and suffocating. And I would want to kill myself if I had those clothes to pick from. So I think in some ways Madonna has this great song about like, well, why can't men wear dresses? And, it's like from the 80s or 90s, but it's a valid song because there isn't a lot of equality for men in terms of attire and how to express themselves. However, I do think it's very important to recognize, just like you're talking about white people, like taking a step back and shutting the fuck up, that it's just really important to recognize that there's a big wound that we're talking about here. The wound is going to be dealt with, I think, in your lifetime, in my lifetime. The wound, I think, is really coming to the surface, and we're seeing how bad it is and how oozing it is and all this. So you've had generation after generation of genetic damage, right, done to these women and their mothers and their grandmothers that were raped and butchered and beaten and everything, and told that they were nothing. They can't read, they can't be educated, they can't own land. And only in the last like 100 years are we starting to treat them like, even halfway decent. But there's still a long way to go. And so I feel like we're not even, just like reparations for Black people in this country. Like, why is Black Lives Matter coming to a head? Because there's a wound there, right? A collective wound that needs to express anger. It needs to explode in the street. It needs to break some buildings open, because there is an inherited land wealth in this country, and there's a reason there's a discrepancy between the rich and the poor that goes along color lines. And there's a reason that white imperialists that ran this country tried to destroy Black Wall Street, and did, and tried to plant Black cocaine in Black families to destroy the Black nuclear family, which they did. So there's a war on Black people in this country. So to have people rise up in the streets makes sense, because there needs to be a time for that collective wound to express itself. So the same for women, and that's the world over. And when you think about generations and generations of slavery that these women have experienced, that their mothers have experienced, this loss of value you talk about, of, oh, my body changes and now I can't be, Steve, who has this great fabulous job at 50, because somehow I'm just a saggy boob sitting over here or something. Like, these horrible things that we do to girls from a young age, it conditions them to only value their body, their worth to men. There's ageism, self-hatred that comes with that. So all these horrible things that we do to women. And now I feel like we're going to have to face the music for that. We're not only going to have to face the music for that, but also look at, how have we treated our sisters? How have we treated our mothers? How have we treated our daughters? How have we treated our female friends? There are ways that I have treated women that I would not treat a man, right? And I'm not proud of that. There's ways that I've treated myself that I would treat a man a lot better. I'm not really proud of that. And I'm not saying invest in guilt. I'm not really into like the whole guilt thing. I think a lot of times like people will have white guilt and it'll keep them from actually, doing anything and being a change agent. And I'm like, well, we can get really mirrored down in guilt. It can be very stagnating.
Well, and then that you're noticing it is really probably the important piece. And then too, some of that reminds me of like the difference between the thoughts and the mind and the ideas and the actual self, because it's your actual self that notices, that's doing the noticing of what's going on.
I think it's horrible at times to realize how deep the misogyny runs. For me, my biggest trauma, and I don't know that I'll ever be over it, wasn't the betrayal by men in the movement. That actually, surprisingly, was not the biggest, betrayal for me. The biggest betrayal for me was women that I saw as sisters, things that I had confided as friends, as confidants, were shared in ways that I thought were inappropriate and unprofessional. And later on, I had to come to terms with the fact that this person did whatever they did, or this person did whatever they did. But I was like, well, bitch, why does it really hurt you? Like, what's, when I'm asking myself, like, why is this really something that you just cannot get over, or really feels oozy? And when you look down, it's still oozing, and you're like, God, is this ever going to stop fucking oozing? Like, I'm going to be 90 and I'm going to be crying over this shit. It's fucking sad as fuck. And so when I realized why it's still oozing and all that, it's because it was a betrayal by a sister. it was a betrayal by someone that I thought had my back and betrayed me, like Judas, or something. And I'm Jewish, so I'm just using that loosely, but just the idea that someone could betray you who's like your friend. And then you start to wonder, well, what does friendship mean? Or does friendship with women not mean what you thought it meant? Or so having a friend do you wrong, for me, I talk a lot when I do interviews and so forth about how we don't allow ourselves in our cultural fabric to look at the complexity of women's relationships with one another. It's like women aren't allowed to have duels. They're not allowed, there's no justification of the loss of women's grief when they lose platonic relationships and have friendships dissolve. I mean, that can be heartbreaking. And we don't recognize the complexity of women's relationships with one another or honor the complexity. And so we don't honor the conflict women have with one another. We see it as very petty or like women having cat fights or something, and it's often dismissed. Like you might say, oh, Claire and Denise don't get along, and someone will be like, oh yeah, I can see that or something, but not understanding like, oh, why don't these women get along, because we don't invest in women's complicated relationships with one another because we're not really interested in women's relationships with one another. Again, a reflection of the misogyny. So when I have said to people, my pain and sorrow comes from these women doing me wrong, similar reaction, right? As I would imagine you telling your story, which is I can feel that people turn off. They turn off because it feels negative. And in plant medicine land, we want to keep it happy and we want to keep it upbeat. Let's be positive, people. Let's be positive, right? And so somehow you become like, you're like, what bizarro universe did I just enter? But like sometimes like somehow like you're now the negative person because you're talking about like a rape basically or something. Like you're talking about something that legitimately was a crime. Like
in the case of like what got me voted off the board had to do with transparency and communication and things that were going on that were not okay, that nobody wanted to talk about. And the organization was male run and male dominated. And, the previous president had been a woman and she couldn't take it anymore. She had to step down because she wasn't supported. And yeah, it's not all gender, but it certainly is complicated. And I guess there's maybe technically a gender balance, but yeah, the two folks that did not vote for my removal when they did it wrong the first time, and I, as the unofficial quality assurance person, said, I'm still on the board, you didn't do it right. And like you were alluding to, instead of, I forget if I think I have a memory that I told them at the time, look, I haven't told, and I told them in writing in a Slack private message to the board. And I said, look, I haven't told anybody. And I have a really good friend who's in the community who I would normally have told this to because I was embarrassed for the board. And I'm like, look, you're making a really bad mistake. I'm not going to tell anybody. You're going to rethink it. And then we're going to move forward from here. But like, instead of that, they said, oh, that's right. We need to dot the I and cross the T. And they went to the two people because out of the 7 people, one of the people was on his way out. They got him done. So they're down to 6 votes. And then they needed 5 of them. And there was a woman and a man who had not voted the first time to remove me. And they made sure to get both of those people to support me. And the one being a woman, I was disappointed. I mean, she is part of the inner circle, and I understand why she would have been pressured to do it. But it is really disappointing when people don't stand up for what's right, because clearly it wasn't right what they did to me. And then too, from the point of view of logic, they cut off the one person that's doing the events. The whole organization is about events. All of the other people are doing guiding the ship and organizational development, big picture stuff. Let's get an executive director. Let's get 6-figure donors. Well, that's over here. But why are we talking about that? That's because we have events. But they just off with my head. And then the technical, I wasn't allowed to get back to this because they actually have now cut me. They've thrown me out of the Slack, so I can't respond. But one of the things that was said was, well, no, they didn't fire me, because I used the word fire at one point. No. We just, you voted you off the board. You were welcome to stay and continue doing all of the work that you're doing without me saying, That's ridiculous. And I told you, if you do this, I will not be doing those things. And you can't see the logic of why. I don't know. It just, yeah, it didn't make any sense. Yeah.
So it's interesting for me to see the way that people are treated. And what you're talking to me about is that these things happened with, it sounds like two males kind of running the ship. Even if these other women are on the board or what have you, it sounds like the leadership, as far as getting you off with her head,
Yeah.
that was more male driven.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
And I thought it was two, but it's actually really was just one person who was supported by another person. Because now that other person has left and is left slash been forced off himself. So the organization, I don't know, what has unfolded since even, we recorded the first part of this. I don't understand why people are staying. And I had a meeting where definitely I was the whiny woman. It was after a Zoom where we had some inner circle people who weren't the board, but were the people that run the things, and had them on the screen. And a couple of them, and they are male people, say, well, yeah, I don't want to get into the politics. I just want to do what I'm doing. And that's what I'm going to do. And that pushes my buttons, because it's like you said, that's, I'm telling you that some bad shit happened to me, and these people who are technically running
right.
this, but granted, they're not running the events, but they're running the organization, are doing bad things. And now more things have come out, and you're still saying, well, let's just don't look at that, let's just do what we're doing. And I stood up for myself, and I'm sure they did not enjoy the meeting, because I was not going to back down. I said, I don't understand. I've gone over here and started my own thing, and I explained what it was. I don't want to be a 501c3. I just want to have a calendar, and people can come and put things on the calendar, and we can create a network of people. And, I think it's doable. I think it's underway. It's happening. All you have to do is move on over, and boom, it's done. And so far, absolutely nobody has come over. And I'm just like, all right, I'm still going to do my thing over here. But it is, on the one hand, I do understand, because I invested 2 years of my life building up the psychedelic society. I don't really want to go start from scratch, but after what happened, I need to do that. And it's just funny to me that there's nobody else that's like, you know what, you're right, what they did to you was that wrong. I'm going to turn my back, and I'm not going to give them any more energy, because if nobody gave them energy, the whole thing would completely collapse. And the latest is that the 23-year-old president who forced me out is now stepping down. He is stepping down from the presidency. He might be leaving the board. I don't know who they're going to get. I heard something about somebody named Mike. I can't even think of who Mike is. There has not been a Mike involved with PPS that comes to mind at all. So I don't know who this person
Is
is.
there any chance that they would revisit having you back on?
Um, I can't really imagine that they would. And it's also not a thing that would happen. I would not go back to that organization. And some of it goes further, like Casey, who used to be the president, will know some of the history further back. That the history from maybe 2014, I think, when it was started by a woman named Helen. Helen absolutely has nothing to do with it, and will have nothing to do with it. She might be a good person. If she probably wouldn't even be interviewed like your mentor. She may say, I won't speak of it. That's how.
But I would be interested in talking to her if you can point her my way, because disgruntled women that have had bad experiences in psychedelic political leadership, send them my way.
Who started organizations,
Yep.
who, yeah.
And who've had it taken for them, or been screwed out of power, any of that. So it's fascinating when you're describing to me what is going on with these people in the group that just want to stay in their lane, and they don't want to get sidetracked with the hysterical woman who's been shoved off the board, and too bad for her, and tough titties, and as long as it doesn't affect what's in my freeway, I'm staying in my lane. So in my family, I have an Asian cousin that was found out to be adopted, right? And so now I want to write this book about my family called I Used to Love My Racist Family, right? Because this Asian cousin was found out and came to the family and wanted to meet his biological father and all this other stuff. And then my uncle said that this is a scam, right? And even though we had like the genetic test results from like the 23andMe or whatever, my uncle who has a bunch of money said, oh, this is a scam. And this guy's just trying to get my money. And I'm so mortified, right? So I go out to Ohio to meet my cousin, sweetest, nicest guy in the world, tears in his eyes because he wants to meet my uncle. I'm horrified by my family's behavior. I'm horrified that my family is allowing my uncle to behave this way and isn't reaching out to my Asian cousin who deserves to be welcomed into this fucking family, you fucking nut jobs. So I am horrified. And when I go to my aunt or I go to these other people in my family, they go, that really isn't my problem. That's not really my problem. And so then I'm the squeaky wheel and I say to them, so when Hitler's rounding up the motherfucking Jews, right, to take them to the camps, is that not your problem? Because you've got these Black Lives Matter like posters plastered around your white neighborhood with your no, friends of color. And you call yourself these giant liberals, yay, 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 Black Lives Matter. But really, you're not really willing to be uncomfortable and stick your neck out there for anyone. Is that pretty much, you're just like a selfish asshole. Like if we're just going to like,
not to mention it's so close. Like when it's actual biology of clearly, I'm going to guess that this person at some point slept with an Asian woman and she had the child and he wants to say that never happened.
Fuck yeah. And he wants to fucking lie about that shit. Fuck him. Fuck him. It's
DNA.
classist. It's racist. Fuck him. But here's the thing. My family does not get to sit here on the sidelines and say, just like this man in this group that says, sorry, bitch, that ain't my problem. To say that's not my problem, because you know what? We are all each other's problems, right? So when I'm being passive while injustices are happening, and I get that people can have different perspectives on injustice, but when I can say, you know what, lady, your stuff sounds whiny and boring and it sounds like a real drag, and I'm not interested in you complaining. I only want to talk about happy, hippie, psychedelic shit. And so if you got bad news about being treated like shit by these big boys and you can't just keep your mouth shut and go talk to your fucking therapist, it's like, I don't need another hysterical woman in my life, right? So people just tune out because they don't want to hear women, because anytime a woman is talking in a way that seems negative, shrewish, condescending, authoritative, women are not treated well in our society. If you're a beautiful, young, hot yoga babe, okay, maybe. But
Yeah. In a very superficial, like how tight is your ass? Yeah, you look good in that outfit. Superficial.
Yeah. Everyone loves you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Until they kill you because you're Marilyn Monroe and you know too much. But so my point was more with my family, trying to get my aunt to recognize, like, you know what, you actually don't get to call yourself a good person. And I'm sorry that that's like a hard conversation to have, and I sound like a real bitch telling you that. But when you're sitting in your comfy little house in Berlin and you're like, oh, it's not my fault if my brother wants to ignore his Asian son. I'm such a nice person, I'm such a good person. And it's like, well, you're actually letting shit go down by virtue of your lack of standing up that is condoning this horrible classist racist behavior. So actually this whole like race politics thing that you say with your whole like my aunt has a thing around her picture, her profile picture is like Black Lives Matter. Where you can really make the most difference by sticking your neck out to fight racism in your own motherfucking family, or the racism is going down today, my friend. That's where you can really show that you want to fight some racism. Take it to the streets with your brother, right? Call your brother out on his racism, right? And that's where people tune you out because they're like, you know what? I don't have time for this. So I think on some level, you could have said to yourself, okay, I'm just going to swallow it. Their lack of respect for me, the blatant misogyny that they're all unwilling to see, the women participating in that, it's clearly a drag that society's not ready to hear any kind of commentary on. No one's interested in my commentary. No one's interested in my opinion. Maybe if you were in the hot yoga pants, but no one's interested in your opinion. So you could have just shut it and zipped it. But you chose not to.
Absolutely. And I chose not to. I'm not going to support it. You mentioned them asking me back. My answer would be no, thank you. You want to come over and support my thing or no? And I think that is probably some sort of quirky place in my personality, in my astrological chart that, yeah, once that switch is flipped and I realize I've been fucked over, it's like, no, I'm not. I, and
But for me, that trigger is always from a therapeutic perspective, going back to our first trigger. So I have to remind myself, like, oh, you felt unheard in your family, or you felt like you got stabbed in the back by your sister. So it's like all these like re-traumatizations because I'm like, oh, this feels familiar. Like, and we all have our story, right? And my husband always teases me because he's like, because I make fun of other people's stories, you know? And he's like, can you make fun of your own story? And I'm like, sure, of course I can. Like, I'm always the victim. No one ever understands me. I'm always taken advantage of. That's pretty much my story, right? Like, so everyone's got their fucking story. So I think we all have our wounds, we all have our story, but there comes times when these injuries are so significant that I think that they can really set us back. Where I think we can be psychologically progressive is we can say women are going to be battling these frontiers for the next 20 years. Women are going to be going into these spaces and trying to lead in these areas where men have dominated for so long, and they have told themselves that they are uh, in dominating. They're not questioning their right to dominate. When I said to John Dennis, you're taking up a lot of space at these meetings, you're taking up a lot of space with your talking, that a woman wouldn't assume the right to just blather on the way you do. So when you say that you're a friend of the people, another nice guy, another big feminist, then you need to take your ass away from that table to make room for, you know, Charlotte or Yasmin over here, who doesn't feel like there's a place at the table for them, because they wouldn't presume to just force their big fat ass to that table like you did, because they're not a dude. And for him to understand that even by talking a lot, you know, you are dominating that space, and women would not blather on like that.
yeah, that is part of why, like the women only spaces, which reminds me, I'm looking to put more um, events on my calendar and was going to do an integration circle. And I probably should do a women only integration circle just because that, like you, like way back when you brought that up, you know, how do you have, you know, that's one way to sort of even the playing field is to have it all be women. Now you still have your more assertive and your less assertive women, but at least you don't have a man in the room that's, you know, that's, yeah.
And some dudes are fine. It's just that women have been taught to prioritize men's needs so much that it can be a real distraction from taking care of themselves or one another. Because women, part of the patriarchy, women have been taught to fear one another, to distrust one another, to not engage in and really help one another. Especially, I see that within white culture. I see more sisterhood within Black culture. So one thing that stood out to me is, yeah, this tragedy happens. Yeah, we're very traumatized. Yeah, women have never been before. This is the Wild West, right? This is the Wild West. You're missing your cowboy hat, right? Like, you should be having a cowboy hat because you're out there in the Wild West. You know, this is like colonized frontier or whatever, right? They're trying to colonize it in the old ways, in the old dominating ways. How do we venture into this frontier as explorers, as women leaders, as adventurers, as explorers? You are going into this uncharted territory in your ship, and now you're in a ship by yourself. You're welcome to put some of your shit up on Entheos Society if you want to. If it's online, then people, if you go to Entheos Society, the 501c3 I run, we have an online calendar, and you can certainly offer up stuff on there, just so you know.
Cool.
But I just thought, like, well, what's the story for the little girl at home who's shy and insecure and introverted and autistic, who says, is there a place for me at the table if I'm not cute and don't have bunny ears, and I'm not, you know, 19, I'm flabby or fat, or I'm big, or I'm ugly, or like, is there a place for me if I'm not cute and coquettish? And what if I'm Aspergy and I'm awkward? Like, show me, lady, that there's a place for me at the table for this little awkward teenager, right? That where I'm going to be heard, and men are not going to put me down or tell me I'm too much, or ignore me when I get hurt, and women are not going to stab me in the back. Like, show me that place. And maybe you need to create your own island, like her land, you know? but I think that would be marvelous, is to have a town that says we're anti misogyny, to the point where we really uplift women in this town and respect and honor women, which means everything we do is about respecting and honoring women, because they've really had such a bad lot of it. I'm worried about you. I'm worried about me, because these sorrows are so deep. They're so in the belly. I'm still so wounded. I'm still so fucked up from this. I don't know if I'm gonna get unfucked from this. If I really wanted to forget about this, I would go to another country and cut off my internet and change my name. And I'm wondering why I'm not doing that. Why am I still trying to do this legalization effort for Washington State? Do you know what I mean? But there was something that you mentioned. Your face kind of got this rigidity to it, because you were hearkening back, probably I would imagine, to your first trauma response, because you said there comes a point for you where there's no going back. Like when someone really fucks you over, you're like, whoa, I get it. For all of us, that harkens back to our first traumatic experience like that, where we recognize like the world is untrustworthy, whatever that moment is. It's usually in our childhood. My point is that there's a point beyond that, like beyond the breakers. Like, yeah, you got fucked. Yeah, you learned hard. Yeah, you had to go back to your earliest trauma response in terms of like, oh, they don't like me. Oh, they're making fun of me. Oh, they're hurting me. Oh, they're torturing me. Oh, they're molesting me. Like, oh, this is wrong. Like, oh my God. So you're going back to your first trauma response and protecting yourself, and all your tentacles are in. But I'm asking you for myself as well, what happens after that, right? Because I want my story to be, she forgave them, even if I don't. But I'm just trying to be a little funny.
Well, and it's interesting because forgiving, and I do understand it more than I used to. Because I used to have anger about things my parents did that I wasn't especially abused, but you know, I had in my 20s, I had a lot of critiques about how things should have been different. And I do get the forgiveness piece. Like it is, you're forgiving them, but you're really in your own way releasing and letting go of that upset energy. And you talk about, creating a separate island society, that's it's off away from things. Um, what I learned from the mushrooms really is about the presence and accepting what is. And still you work to make a difference where you can, but letting go of the past and realizing, yes, we have traumas and we have triggers and whatever, but like in this moment, I'm okay. I'm safe. I'm housed. I have food. I have electricity. I have all the things that I need in this moment. And truly accepting what is, Portland Psychedelic Society was not what I thought it was going to be. And so, accept it and move on to, to create my own thing. And that doesn't so much touch on the piece. I guess in theory, I should forgive what they did. I almost like the idea of just kind of letting it go and ignoring it. But I suppose that's holding on to it in some ways if you don't truly forgive.
Well, it's interesting because the wound just keeps resurfacing for me. And so it's interesting how I deal with the wound, because sometimes I'm embarrassed about the wound. Sometimes I'm ashamed about the wound. Sometimes I'm like, no, man, like if you talk about the wound, that will free you. If you take away the stigma of it, like I did something bad, even though I didn't do anything bad, but these people made me think that I did something bad, but they did something bad. But everyone thinks that I did something bad, but I never got to tell my story. But like, and it's like all these things that I used to have clients that would talk a lot about like the minutia details of like when people took their kids, or when they like lost their loved one in some overdose or something. And the details are so like magnified, and they just can't let them go. And they just keep resurrecting all the details, and they speak it to you. And it's like a recorded record, right? It never stops. It's like this rut in your brain where someone has like a PTSD aspect of their brain. And so every time they tell you the story, it's kind of trauma inducing. And I just don't want to be that, right? I never wanted to be one of my clients and just be this kind of pitiful, fucked up person. But then I've like come to this place now, kind of like what you're talking about, which seems so Buddhist to me, but what about accepting I'm still in pain and that's okay? And the pain, I don't, who knows when it'll end, but if we cannot focus on the future or the past, but just the now, the pain's here now.
Yeah, and you
And
accept the pain because that is the difference between pain and suffering. Pain, which I'm lucky I don't really have pain in my body right now, but there are people that do, and there's emotional pain and there's psychological pain. And when it can sort of a fact, but it's in whether you're looping on it and just like, the mind piece of you're resisting it, you're not accepting it, you're looping on it. That's the suffering part. The pain is just sort of there. And when you can more accept it and be thankful for the things that are going well, or yeah,
well,
just
no, I mean, there's just this raw beauty to like for David Bronner, like I felt like I had a friendship with him, and then I felt like he did me wrong, and then I've just kind of been holding on to that, and one day I was like, well, you probably still care about David, and probably you felt like you had an ally there and a friend there, and that probably hurts you, and it's okay to feel kind of mixed, convoluted feelings about people of like, wow, man, I really feel like they hurt me, and I may never get resolution with that, or I'll never know like how they saw things or resolve that in some way. And like, I don't know, I think a lot of aspects of life are painful that we don't have resolution around, right? And we may never get resolution about it because, like you said in the beginning of this segment of the interview, how mushrooms or psychedelics can amplify where someone's at. Well, people don't always have things figured out for themselves. So maybe their lack of that things being figured out is amplified. And so I really feel like my greatest challenge is living with the questions. Like you never know if someone felt bad about something. You never know if what someone else said was like a lie or they misconstrued it on purpose or if they were motivated to hurt you. And so what if you can be like the way you're describing, like that Buddhist kind of acceptance of like, well, this just is. You're still in pain. They're still breathing, Anne Hesh just died, like this life just continues to move on, and then we leave this body and go wherever, and like, so I think for me it's having the graciousness to be forgiving of myself, to be hurt and not be over it. And I'm kind of still embarrassed that this is still, I mentioned your first interview, really just being like, whoa, I'm back in the flames of this shit again. This hurts, this is a little too close for comfort. Because you being treated horribly reminded me of being treated horribly. And the way that the days like line up, where you're like, I talked to this person this day and this person this day. And then within like 5 days, just boom. There's a lot of someone else is maneuvering behind the scenes to orchestrate your life that you didn't see coming. That can be a trauma thing because you're like, oh, when was the last time someone like molested me or raped me or hurt me and I didn't see that coming? Like, oh my God, I'm going to have to stay on my guard at all times. I should never sleep, And then you have to remind yourself, like, well, that's silly. Of course you need to sleep. And um, I think the thing that bothers me the most is I felt like I was like on top of it, and I felt like I was uh like a big deal, and a lot of people that were important were contacting me. Do you know what I mean? And I was feeling pretty darn special and empowered and excited about who I was. And I didn't know that someone could just take that like in a day. Do you know what I mean? Based upon some bullshit. Do you know what I mean? And I didn't see that coming. And I think a lot of times people don't see that coming. I think, life can be crazy, right? But it's the first time falling on my duffer in such a public way. And I didn't see it coming. It wasn't something like, there was something that bothered me in the first interview. You said I made a mistake, and you were talking about the email you had sent out, but the way you described it was almost like self-chastising, like a child going for penance. And I was like, damn, I don't want this bitch talking like that about herself. Like when you described it to me, I was like, it's nothing. My God, get
out
these
of nothing.
people.
Well, it was funny because I just that's part of my personality is to really take responsibility. I think more so than a lot of people, I can be objective about a lot of things, and I did not intent. I sent a private message and I screwed up and it went to 8,000, 7,000 people. But it was ironic because that was the catalyst for why this happened to me. And the reason I sent it was because the president who ultimately forced me out, he's the one who made the mistake. He's the one who sent out an email that didn't have a link in it and then had to send out another email saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, here's the link." And the irony on that is weird. Even though too that wasn't the whole reason. It was also really about the squeaky wheel where they were not being transparent, and I continued to ask for transparency. They were not communicating, and I
So
continued.
the real reason they may have wanted you off is you were asking for transparency, and that was annoying, and they found that annoying.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then you have to realize like maybe where your transparency would be appreciated, your thing for transparency.
Well, and that's what happened. Is that's my, I think I call it the intention, not the mission, but of my new group, transparency and cooperation and compassion are like right in the front of that thing. That is what my organization is about. And I would be called on that. If there's some way that I'm not being transparent, I hope somebody comes up and points it out to me, because I'm here to learn. I'm not perfect. But that's a core value. Whereas
So do you see the impact that money causes for these organizations?
I don't know.
Did you, I mean, for me, I was running this grassroots organization. Everything was friggin' fine. I got big money to the table. As soon as I got big money to the table, and then we hired this guy that David Bronner paid for, but it was a guy that I agreed to hire to help us. But he was like this old white dude, and I thought we were going to get like this young black guy and this young like woman of color. But it turned out to be the old white guy that was like the Teamsters dude, and he really encouraged the coup that happened, like these young white men that were trying to like kind of come on up or whatever. And it felt for me like he was behind my back fucking me over, but I had agreed to have this person come on, and this is our big political moment and everything. And I didn't realize until later, like, oh, some of these people, when money entered the picture, their eyes got very greedy, or they started doing stuff behind the scenes I didn't see coming, because I didn't see power hungriness, because I was blind or whatever. I missed that part of myself. I missed the part of myself that was naive and optimistic. And I liked that person more than I like who I am now, because I feel like I'm bitter and all wounded and oozing and spilling my blood all over everyone. And, it's messy. And I liked that person better.
Wow. Um, as far as I know, there's not. Portland Psychedelic Society is sort of about to have significant money, or they thought. I don't think it's going to happen, but so I don't know that it had in some ways some of the power struggle may have been around anticipating that happening. And I don't.
That's my point is you're because like within my group, it's like we were just about to cross that line to be the largest city in the world to decriminalize plant medicine, right? And that's when the power struggle stuff began, of let's get rid of her. I think difficult women are hard to challenge because we're not used to engaging with them. We're used to murdering them. We're used to beating them up. We're used to killing them. We're used to ignoring them. We're not actually used to interacting with them. You know what I mean? We
Yeah.
can allow the crone to exist as long as she's on a mountaintop in a distant painting from like Alex Gray or some shit, right? But we can't actually interact with the crone or the crone in making, right? We're not really interested in those bitches. So that's what I'm hopefully doing with this podcast, is really highlighting these women. I put something on my Facebook and this woman jumped up, and she'd been part of the decriminalization effort in Colorado, I believe, or Minneapolis or Michigan or something. And she said she had left because she felt so disparaged as a woman, that even by other women she felt disparaged. And I don't know if there's a place in our culture to talk about the heartbreak of having your sisters betray you, that's different. You kind of grow up in a world where men, even the nice guys, might be dicks if the other dudes come around and they have to put down the woman.
But
But
when
it,
it happens with the women,
right.
yeah, it's interesting. I've gotten this flash a couple of times, and I don't know how many listeners will know about astrology, but the the bullshit that we talk about, the powerful, patriarchy doing, is a very Saturnian thing. Saturn is very rules and structure and patriarchy, and I was trying to think of what, women aren't naturally as much that way, and trying to think of, the moon or Venus or even maybe Jupiter, which is just very expansive, and you know maybe that's more of the female way of being, and you kind of need all the different ways. But yeah, when the Saturn energy just gets out of line and just wants to crunch everything, one way to think of it is the rings of Saturn like squeezing the planet. They just constriction and restriction, and an order. They're big on order, but when it's to like a militant, totalitarian, it's our way or the highway kind of place.
I do this little stand-up routine where I talk about how there's men that come into my organization and they're always like, wait a second, like there's no man leading here. Like I've got a penis. Like if one's needed, I'm here, I'm available, I'm ready. I got the equipment. And then when they realize like no one's like craving like, the penis to lead or whatever, they're like, you guys, I got spreadsheets. I understand Excel. We need some pragmatism around here. I understand the linear format. Do people understand the linear format? And it's like, whoa, buddy, whoa, I can pull a spreadsheet out of my ass too. Do I want to pull an Excel spreadsheet out of my ass? No, that may not be my thing, right? But there are these guys that come along that are kind of like, I'm Mr. Pragmatic, and you guys are a bunch of, disorganized, woman-led, insane people. And to kind of push back and be like, well, actually, we're not doing that patriarchal bullshit.
If you
So,
can do it from a like holistic flow, being present and flowing and letting the magic go. But yeah, if you're all about control and order and planning, then they just poo poo. Oh, that's no structure. Well, that's not going to work. How do you think a tree grows? You think a tree's got like timetables and structure and whatever? It's an essence thing where the seed, it started as a tiny little seed and now it's a tree, and it's
and
like,
that's why I always end up confused because I'm like, do I innately need a piece of paper or some weird organizational struggle and hierarchy and all this other bullshit? Like, do I personally need that? Because I feel like I'm more like a tree, and that I feel like we're doing it. Like, look at us, we're doing it. We've been doing it for 3 years, and it's never been like how you want it. But we need to create new paradigms. We need to create new ways to lead that maybe allow for these things to happen in a more of an organic, intuitive way. I like the fact that you're running your organization without it being a 501c3 and just saying like, well, why do we need to be a 501c3? Why can't we just like go ahead
yeah,
and fuck with
it'd be a very like collaborative idea of, I'm willing to give a fair amount to, somebody has to like be the person that has the calendar, but people come up and be independent but be in a group. And yeah, if you want to, so most things will be free, but if you want to charge, you put your Venmo and you charge, and we don't have to mix all our money together.
right.
It seems, and I ran it by a really young but college graduate who has some business experience, and I said, am I just out of my mind, or like, does it seem like this would work? And he's
Right.
like, yeah, you could do it that way. Now granted, I'm
So
not going to
it's
become a
very
really,
egalitarian. And so what I'm doing at Entheos Society, which I started in Seattle, as far as our office space goes, is we have like microdosing and jazz. We have like a Black woman that just gave a talk about doing psilocybin with her and her 80-year-old mother. She's an herbalist on our political action committee board. And so different people are charging different things, but the money just goes directly to them. So it is like what you're suggesting. And
yeah.
so I'm hoping it'll just grow and grow because we have a physical location.
Yeah, and that's the thing is when you do that's the piece that gets a little tricky, which even at the small level that financially that PPS is, the men's group has a group and they have a physical, like, in-person event. Well, unless you want to do it at your house, and if you've got an open to the community event, you really should do it in a public place. It doesn't cost a whole lot, but maybe it costs $50. And to like me individually, no, I don't want to pay $50 to host an in-person event. But you know, so it can be good to have that. And yet too, in that model, you just need to let people know, please kick in $5 to $10 so we can pay for this room. And it should all work out, even if it's decentralized in that way.
I
And,
know.
and two, part of why I invented this, and don't want to have a board, is I'm not interested in investing something that someday can turn on me and fire me. It's
Right.
like, this is I named it after myself, which is new for me. I'm not a young woman, and this is the first time I think I've named something, calling it Hekati's Network. Named it after myself. Um, and yeah, nobody's going to get rid of me because I am the founder of the thing. And at the
Right.
same time, I'm a very benevolent leader. As long as you
That's
are going
curious.
to, as long as
I
you
don't know.
keep
Because
my umbrella.
I tell people I run a queentocracy. I'm all about the queentocracy, which basically it's my way or the highway. But at the same time, I'm the kind of person where I'm like, tell me if you don't like it. Like, tell me why you don't like it. Let's all decide together. So I don't feel like I'm a queentocracy, but I'm very like a benevolent dictator. Um, so I thought it was interesting when I saw this kind of steely resolve in your face, and it made me imagine, oh, wow, that kind of takes her back, I would imagine, to her first moment when she realized like life can fuck you over or people can do you wrong. Because you said after you realized like these people kind of fucked me over, that was it for you. And I think there's a reclaiming of our self-esteem in those moments of like, oh, I'm actually not interested in being abused. Yeah, like no, not interested in that role. Thanks very much. But can we stand up for ourselves without becoming like bitter assholes that can't laugh and can't joke and aren't like, I just wasted 2 years with these assholes and they ran away with my work. And because I think women are bitter and grieving in that area. That's their wound, right? They've given so much work that has just been unrecognized labor, that yet again their labor is being stolen again, or yet again they're not being taken appreciated. So it's interesting to me that you said when Sari and I first started interviewing you, that this was actually one of the best things that happened to you, which I think you had these moments where my clients on the street were people like you or I who got kicked out of their community. They are people that got excommunicated from their families or whatever. And that can unravel a person because you can feel so disconnected, and it can make you question your essential worth, because your family and your community are who define, like, reflect back to you who you are, right? Your intrinsic worth. So then you can start to feel like, oh, I'm worthless. Why don't I become a heroin addict? Or why don't I just go kill myself? Or, something. So there's that moment where we decide when we've been rejected and we're the baboon in the corner and all the other baboons are throwing sticks at us, right? And that's a horrible place to be. And my heart goes out to you, right? But in that moment, when you're that one baboon that's like, fuck, these motherfuckers are going to tear me limb to limb. Like, I'm not in a safe jungle anymore and eating my banana and being happy. That moment where you're like, I might as well kill myself because this tribe of apes is going to kill me. Or I'm going to branch off and create my own calendar of events and believe in myself and name something after me because I'm fabulous and I love myself and I'm super cool. And I'm going to make it so that people can't fucking take that shit from me, right? Ever again. But like, that's a fighter's a vote. You're voting for your future with that vote. You're voting for yourself with that vote. Even if they haven't come yet, you're going to build it and they will come. That takes vision and tenacity. But ultimately, there's that moment when you're kicked and on the floor, when the baboons were throwing, the apes were throwing the shit at you and hurting you. You could have chosen to not take care of yourself and not believe in yourself and tell yourself, oh, I'm a loser and I'm going to hate myself because these people think.
Yeah, to keep focusing on the loss rather than to realize, but for me, it was a loss. And yet I did over the months and years describe my relationship with PPS as sort of like an addiction and sort of like a bad relationship. And I was never going to break up with PPS. They had to kick me out. And when they did kick me out, it was a shock because I didn't see it as much as there was tension and I was the squeaky wheel and I knew they weren't happy. We were still moving along and things were getting better because, we started using Slack. And so communication was starting to happen and I was really hopeful. And then boom, no warning, no whatever, you are off the board. It was a shock. And then once I was able to recalibrate, I'm like, oh, wait, all of this, because I was so committed. I was so committed to doing all of the things and they don't know what I did. But every day, 2 or 3 hours every day, I would be talking about working on doing things to run that organization. And all of a sudden, boom, that's gone. That's where, and as I got a little clarity, and that's where the idea of I can start my own calendar. That's what I want to do because it was a loss. I didn't want to not have events and not be doing this work. But hey, it's a free country. I can start my own calendar. And
So it forces you to grow because you chose that moment to not give up on yourself.
but it was a weird,
But it's an interesting moment because you can go either one of two ways.
yeah.
I am curious, were there any older women, not just younger women, but older women on the board that voted you off?
There is a really interesting older woman. In fact, I wonder if Peggy would let you interview her. She is a really interesting person. Apparently she has a lot of nonprofit experience. I can't quote what it is, but that's my understanding. For the 2 years I was on the board, I kind of always wondered what Peggy did because she didn't really seem to do much. But now apparently organizational development is her jam. And so she is right there with Evan, who is unlikely pair. She's significantly older than me, and he's 23, and they're working together to like guide this ship where they're going. And she doesn't know. In fact, she might have been she was the person who made the motion to remove me from the board as soon as I left the meeting, the kangaroo court after the first time they did it, which they didn't record, but the second time when I watched it. And yeah, I don't know. I guess trying to frame that with like her understanding what she's doing to me as, a woman doing this to another woman. And to me, that in this particular example, she is enough off in her own world. She doesn't attend events. She doesn't understand what's any of the. She doesn't do
she's easily led by this young man who
can be. Yeah, could very well be.
But you're not holding her like accountable because you're saying you're kind of excusing her on some level because you're saying she was feeling disconnected or she was maybe easily led by this younger man.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't her idea.
No, but she didn't choose to.
But she did. But yeah, well, and in that particular example, it's really interesting because it reminds me one of the last interactions I had with her, which was coming right up to when they kicked me off the board. We were also coming right up to it was supposed to be an in-person retreat, we were calling it, for the board to discuss the big picture strategic plan stuff, which is her thing, and Evans and ultimately all of the board members. And coming up to that, there was some dialogue on Slack, and they were talking about 9 people. And at that point, there were 8 of us on the board, or no, there were 7 of us on the board. And then there was Nick, who was the, what's that called? Consultant who was hired to like lead us through this process. So that was 8. And she was quoting that there would be 9 at this venue. And I asked her once, I said, who is this 9th person? And she like 3 times she didn't answer me. Like the first time she said something like, oh, I guessed it was this woman Taryn, because Taryn, who's not on the board, who has a lot of project development or project management skills, so she was helping with the symposium and whatever. Maybe it was Taryn. I had heard, that maybe it was her. Well, no, her answer wasn't that it wasn't Taryn. She said, well, Taryn is working on the symposium. She's not on this signal thread or something. And I said, well, but who is this ninth? It's not Taryn. Who's this ninth person? And then she said, I said, oh, is it or she said it was God, no, I'm sorry. I'm so rusty with the story, but the short the overall version, there were three. She gave three different answers before she finally told me, oh, it's this woman. Actually, is another woman who's a little bit older than me, Donna, who had left in January, February, who'd basically sort of been forced off the board with other people who weren't doing 5 hours of work for the board a week. And then 2 months later, she's coming back. And I was really upset about that because nothing had really changed. And she was being brought back because she is very much a fan of Evan and somebody that's within this clique of, we'll rubber stamp whatever you want to do. And I was really upset that they kept adding people and having this, what do they call it? I guess they called it the strategic planning committee was deciding who was going to be on the board. And they would just show up at a meeting. Here's this person, ask them questions. We're going to vote. And pretended, it's just I don't know if it's hypocrisy or not being very smart. With Peggy, with her multiple answers, and then finally she admits that it's Donna that's going to be voted on. We're going to stuff her on the board next week, and so she's going to come 2 days later to this, to this event we're having. That was a moment when I realized either Peggy is really not very smart, like seriously not very smart, or she is manipulating and lying and misleading me. And either of those answers is not good, but I don't think that she's not smart. I think it's that she was trying to give me an answer, the politician answer of, oh, I'm giving you an answer, stop asking. And I kept coming back and asking the question directly, which of course upsets people who are trying not to be transparent. Yeah, but yeah, Peggy is older than me, and Donna, who was on the board and then she disappeared or left, and now she's back on, is another person who, yeah.
So, and why it interests me is that we often gloss over what happens to women from other women. And I feel like that's the moment that is very telling is, do the women go along with the popular, whatever the men are kind of cooking behind the scenes? Or do they stand up for their fellow sisters, or do they kind of backstab because it's considered normalized by misogynistic culture? But Sari and I had talked about in our first podcast having kind of like a star rating system where people got rated based upon their ability to be an ally to women. So men got rated, women got rated, what have you. But that just for me, I am drawn to women's relationships with other women. And like I said, for me, one of the things that has been the most traumatic was having women do me wrong, and realize that these women can do you wrong in a way that feels extra cold because I'm assuming there's a bond of sisterhood. And now I'm recognizing that these women don't have a bond of sisterhood and maybe pretended to have a bond of sisterhood, which feels manipulative or feels fake to me. But then on top of that, to realize like it's not necessarily these women's fault per se. Not that they should not be held accountable, because oftentimes they're blind to the microaggressions and nuances of how they're being co-opted into the misogyny towards other women. It's more the fact that it's that their silence when their sisters are being oppressed, or their ability to allow it to happen, is very detrimental. And it's something that we can't change the patriarchy until we allow women to be held accountable. And so I think a lot of times we excuse women in these stories. We say, oh, it was this asshole, this 23-year-old, who was full of himself and now he's gotten ousted, that young fool or whatever, right? But we don't say, oh, look at this woman that allowed that to happen. And look at this woman who pretended not to know the truth or know the answer.
It's interesting. Yeah, I found myself thinking and remembering or rolling, you know, uh, through myself. Yeah, I don't think about or blame or look at or consider much Peggy, Donna, who else is there? I guess there aren't any other or Allison actually, yeah. I don't um yeah, I think it is like a self-preservation thing where I can't let myself go there to know that. But I got a deeper, like earlier memory, which I'll share briefly of when that had happened to me. When I was a fairly young teenager, I was probably 14 or it might have been 16, 15 or 16. And my pot dealer at the time was a 21, 22-year-old guy who had a crush on me. And I found myself like I went to his apartment because he had lived at home with his, but I think he lived at this apartment with some other people. And so I went to the apartment to like buy some pot or whatever it was. And there was sort of a little party going on. And he had female roommates. There were a lot of women in that fucking room. And I don't know how obvious. I looked kind of older, but I would think that you could tell that I was not 20. And, I was there and alcohol was had. And of course, I'm sure he encouraged me or whatever. I was a teenage partier, so I drank and pretty much passed out. And I woke up to this guy basically molesting me. Where did the women go? There was a fucking circle. I didn't know these women, but they were my peers and they were like 20 something year old women that left me in the room with this fucking creep. And it's like, yeah, I remember like obviously being upset with him, but feeling very betrayed about like, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have left a young woman who's clearly passed out with my like, friend who clearly was going to just do whatever he was going to do. Yeah, that's it's funny too, because I don't think about that particular event too often, but yeah, that guy there's more than one story of shit like that happening with that person. And I think in recent years I have considered trying to potentially look him up to talk to him and just say, I don't know if you're still doing this to people, but like that's more than just yeah, it's yeah, to let him know how out of line that was.
But. So there's a attorney in Southern California, and I read about her because she was helping people sue their perpetrators, but even if it's past the point of statute of limitations, so maybe doing it from a civil suit kind of perspective. But she talks a lot about how there's a psychological benefit when people have taken things from us, whether it's sexual abuse or physical abuse or emotional abuse, whatever, they've taken like pieces of our soul, right? And so you may never get that back. You can't really put a price on that. But what she says is there's like a piece of us that feels like, I don't know, somehow resolved or settled in some way because I got something to show that you fucked with me.
Yeah.
I have something to prove that you did this to me, something physical I can put my hands on. So those of us who are physically oriented, who need some kind of tangible proof that I survived this hell, money might be a good way, So whatever you do with that, yeah, I think sometimes it's hard to track down our abusers, but I think that those are brave conversations to have. So I am interested in writing a book with other women about their experiences of leading in the psychedelic movement from a political perspective, because I don't think we have a book of a compilation of stories. So I would like you to think about that. Because if I could get a chapter from 25 women around the country, and if we could see similar themes, right,
Yeah.
then maybe the nice guy out there or the nice gal, right, who thought that she was, just going along with the gang and just helping things run smoothly, guys, don't want to make any waves. that that they read the book and they're like, wow, I was a participant in that. I remember when that woman left and I never said anything, and I just believed it when everyone said she was an asshole. So it would be interesting to get a compilation of stories together, because I want someone in a political history course to read about these women in psychedelic politic history, and to read the real stuff, not the glossed over good housekeeping story. So
Yeah.
psychedelics changed my life.
Yeah, I will definitely take a look at that. I am sort of at a place where, at least once I get word that I got the second apartment, I actually rented an apartment and immediately had found something else I liked better, and it really highlighted all the things that I didn't like about the one that I got. So pretty soon, hopefully, my housing situation is going to be, 40% more expensive, but resolved, and I'll have some time to think about writing.
Yeah, so this is a project I see over the next year,
Yeah,
is because I've already been working on my own book about leading in the psychedelic space, but the more I think about it, the more I'm really inspired to get stories from women all over the United States.
that's a great
Um,
idea because, like you
yeah,
said, when you start to see those themes, we aren't all
yeah,
copying off each other's paper. There's
no.
25 different people
And then
in.
I think, and then all these people that are like, well, I need research, I need facts, show me the proof, all of that business. They would read that book and be like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. There's 25 women with very similar stories. Like, whoa. Um, so yeah, and then how do we, I think storytelling can be so powerful. My plan to take over the world is also to do a lot of stand-up comedy making fun of the plant medicine movement, because I think of Carlin and how much he was able to accomplish with humor, and I think there's so much humor in these psychedelic communities,
Yeah.
and I think we can laugh at ourselves through humor, and there's not enough laughing at ourselves. People are taking themselves very seriously. Plant medicine guru.
I would love to see them. Actually, do you do either on stage or now with Zoom? You could do half hour Zoom set like
Yeah,
once a month or whatever.
I know, I know. Part of it is first, we're doing a comedy open mic night at the center that I opened in Seattle. Um, I'm not actually going to be here for this first one, but part of it is just setting the intention. But in different podcasts, I've made fun of aspects of the psychedelic movement, but I haven't like just dived in full throttle yet. So I'm going to end for the night, but I just want to apologize again from a very like warm-hearted, loving place, that I feel like Sari and I know that she didn't intend to, and I know that I didn't intend to, but I feel like I want you to formally accept our apology. That just is important to me because I want to respectfully honor your story. And I feel like we did a disservice to you with the first interview and how it ended, that part of it. And that feels very important for me to acknowledge that, because I see a lot of times women saying like, oh, it's no big deal, or oh no, it's fine, or whatever.
Well, yeah, and I do accept your apology, and I
Okay.
know that nothing with bad was intended, but I will also reflect back that my experience was that I felt like maybe I did something wrong. I felt like, and I think maybe towards the end, Sari said something about like, or one of you said something about like the back and forth, like this was like, it was me. It was a monologue for 40 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever it was, and yeah, it was interesting to feel like that I had done something wrong. And but then fairly soon after that, we got in touch, and you said no, there's that, yeah. So I don't still feel that way, but at the time it
No,
was,
but do
yeah.
you realize it's profound and it brings me to tears to have you say, "Hey, I felt like I fucked up or I did something wrong," because so often we have a moment where we feel like, "Oh, am I the mistake or did I,
That's
do
the
something
classic. That's the
shameful?"
victim. When I was molested as a child,
Right,
I felt like it was my fault. Like he
right,
really liked me, which I guess on some level is probably true. But the freaking child blaming themselves when
right.
they're victimized by some
Right. But
bad situation.
also, it's beautiful to have you talk about feeling that you had done something wrong because we don't often allow ourselves to talk about thinking we did something wrong. We don't often allow ourselves to say, "Oh, I thought you didn't like me," or "I thought you didn't like what I said," or whatever. So, the more we can demonstrate that it's okay to say, "Hey, I felt like I did something wrong. Do you guys hate me?" Like, you know what I mean? It just makes it so that we can be vulnerable and that it's safe to be vulnerable and that hopefully we're not re-traumatizing each other as sisters that are trying to support one another.
Yeah,
But we come from such wounded landscapes that, I just want to be conscious of the fact that like I had to take a moment to be like, you guys probably did kind of traumatize this woman and in the way that you handled that. And yet you'll readdress it.
yeah. Stuff happens, and yeah, we live and learn, and
It's also interesting to sit with it as opposed to just zooming on and instead saying, "Oh, I really felt like we handled that horribly. How are you?"
yeah, it was awkward, and yeah, and I guess I mean it was sort of felt like it was a miscommunication because I didn't have. I guess I had like 2 hours in my head, and we probably at the beginning could have said what it was because I assume something didn't just happen. I assume that she only had an hour, and we had gone the hour, and so she needed to go. And
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
learning
we
place.
had done shorter interviews, maybe gone a little bit over an hour for some of them. But for me, when I sat down with your story afterward, I was like, but think about it. Like, this is like kind of like a long story. It's a traumatic story. If
Well,
I
and you
were
did
to,
that. You
and
underscored that it had just had. You're like, oh, this
yeah,
June. Oh, because
yeah,
you
I
didn't
knew.
know. Like Sari knew it had just happened, but you didn't know. Yeah, this
Well, and
happened.
also, if I were telling my story, it's a long, meandering story that does turn into a monologue. And I think as I tell that traumatic story, it will become easier to tell it in more succinct ways. But I have so many emotions that come up as I'm telling it that it is hard to keep it succinct because emotions are happening. But hearing your story helps me, and what you said tonight has helped me, and I do believe that we are going to change the world by changing, by giving each other permission to talk about the things that people tell us are negative.
Yeah,
So I think you're doing the brave work by being a participant and being up for, the fact that the thing is for me, when I got wounded, I laid on the beach like a crab with its belly hanging out, that's been gouged and its innards are pouring out onto the beach. I remained immobile for quite some time until I could kind of, you use the term shock, but like the fact that you're up and running and you're, trying to get yourself motivated to do your thing, I applaud you for that because I feel like I remained very immobile for quite some time because I was in so much shock.
yeah, yeah. In some ways, my reaction was like I always knew that I didn't do anything wrong in that situation, and so oh, you can resign. Why would I resign? You're forcing me off the board. Force me off the fucking board. Oh, you stepped down from your position. I told you if you disrespected me and forced me off the board for no fucking reason, I wasn't going to do that anymore. So you did like it's a distinction, it's a difference without a distinction to say I stepped down. They get to say it because technically I stepped down from that position even though I always expressed they have voted me off the board and therefore I'm not going to be doing the 20 hours a week that I've been doing for 2 years, and they're trying to find somebody to do it, and good luck with that. What kind of stupid plan was that? Like it's fine to fire somebody, but I don't know. I guess maybe they thought because women just take the fucking abuse, I guess they just thought they would just smack me down and I would say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go over here and continue my work."
I know. Let me be your servant or your slave, because that's what women are good for, especially as they age.
Yeah, I should be lucky to, like you said, have a seat at the table at all.
Yep, you're lucky. Sorry, I can be so sarcastic and mean.
Yeah. Go find my own table and yeah.
Yeah. Just
But
anyway,
well, thanks for,
I really appreciate getting to know you. If you're ever in Seattle, come by the center and check it out. Maybe you could do a workshop or something here. Stay in touch, and then once we get this edited, which should be like within 2 months, then it'll be out.
cool. Well, I look forward to that. And yeah, I'm going to if they don't postpone it a third time, I believe September 19th, which strangely is a Monday, is when Eckhart Tolle is supposed to be in Seattle for the evening, and I have tickets. So in fact, I have two tickets, and I'm not sure who I'm taking with me because I was going to take my friend, who's the treasurer, the guy from the PPS, who has not spoken to me since he voted me off the board. So I guess he's not going. Um, but uh, but yeah, I got to figure out where I'm staying and what I'm doing while I'm up there because I'm not going to drive up and back in a day.
And
But
what's the deal? September 19th.
yeah, September 19th, which is a Monday night, is that event I'm going to. So like I could potentially come up a day before that or stay. I'm definitely going to want to stay that night and maybe drive back Tuesday, but it's sort of, yeah.
Do you know where the Eckhart Tolle is? The
It
event.
is at the Paramount.
There you go, downtown Seattle.
Yeah. And when I
Uh,
was looking at like places to stay, it's like, oh my goodness. Um not cheap. Seattle's not a cheap town anyway, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do because I have some friends. I have a couple of friends that live up in Seattle, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna. I don't know. I'm gonna figure it out.
okay. We'll stay in touch because if you need a place to crash on the 19th, I have a futon. It's kind of thin, but it's in my study, and then I'm in downtown Seattle, kind of the opposite end. But just something for you to think about.
Cool. Yeah, it might be fun to spend a little more time not on the Zoom screen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But just I have this disease, myasthenia gravis, so I end up not having like all that much energy and so forth. So sometimes it can be like a kind of a letdown when people visit me and they're like, "Oh, she just like wants to just
That's
lay
okay.
there."
I don't. That's yeah, and I'm yeah. That
But
would probably
anyway, I just want you to know that like that would probably work. So if you can park in downtown and then just take the bus up to your Eckhart Tolle thing, just think about it. So just stay in touch.
all right. Well, it's been lovely talking to you, and yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Okay, have a good night. Okay,
Bye.
take care. Bye bye.